Hello, hello, hello. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Welcome to another Tale of High Adventure. I don't know what the last night's game session would be. Low adventure. Really wasn't any adventuring at all. Medium adventure? No. Social adventure? Perhaps social adventure is the right term. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, thanks for joining this game recap and just general chatting stream. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have had a game session last night. We had missed a couple of weeks. Just things happen. I think kids were getting sick. Schools are opening. Kids are getting back to school, and forgetting even COVID. Just kids being around other kids tends to unleash all kinds of hellish diseases, illnesses, ailments of all sorts. They get spread around, and so I'm in a group with everyone else are dads, or all of us are dads. So we kind of were taking turns, not me, but the other dads, having to bow out due to their kids being sick. But we finally got it together last night. As I mentioned, if you happen to be watching the stream where I wrapped up the Worlds Without Number campaign tool series after 9 episodes. Whew, so that's 9 hours, more than 9 hours of going through that tome. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in the session. I wasn't expecting anything big because no plans had been made. It had been a couple weeks since we'd played. There had been, or we had left the last session with a bit of a, not really a cliffhanger, but the consequences of one of the players deciding to have their character go off on their own on a little sidetrack. Nothing in the chat says, heard of low fantasy games. Low adventure games is new. Yeah, this was definitely, last night was definitely what I would consider a low adventure game. They were in one location. It didn't even do a lot of purchasing. It was all, I suppose we could call it social adventuring. But we had to restart from a spot in which one of the players basically just showing up back in town, back at, say, Party HQ, we can call it, with 2 bodies in a wagon, one of which being a wolf person, wolfling, my version of a lycanthrope body, who was someone who had attacked him on the road, and one their hireling, the poor driver of the wagon, who had not only been killed by 2 spears, but then unceremoniously run over by his wagon. So that's where the session before this one had ended, with him showing back up and basically, kind of a nice, again, kind of a social cliffhanger of, oh my gosh, look what happened to me, dumps 2 bodies on the floor. So that's where he picked it up last night, with that same moment. And this was interesting because I really let the player explain it, because if you recall, or if you don't, he was off doing a little trying to recover from something that he had done. So this same player, his character controls this magic item. We just call it the magic flute. It doesn't have a name. This flute's able to contact a fey power that they know of. They've used it once. I really intended it as a single-use item, but they keep going back to the well, and I keep having it kind of fizzle in different ways. I'm wondering if it has some other function, or maybe I've been rolling dice, and if I get a high enough number, I think I've been looking at rolling a D100. If I get above 95, maybe something interesting happens, but so far nothing good has happened. So essentially they're just kind of blowing into it. But they keep imagining they can do more with it. And one of the other players is super into this flute. He always wants to get the flute. And so these players have been kind of jockeying for the flute, with the player who owns it always holding up his little carrot. Like, if you do this for me, I'll give you the flute. But so far the other character hasn't bought. In any case, when they were in another town, he commissioned a carpenter to make copies of the flute for nefarious reasons, all of his own. I still don't know exactly what the game plan was, But as part of their curse where things of theirs are tending to go bad, the carpenter actually stole the original flute and replaced it with a slightly better copy, a little bit better of a copy than the more rudely fashioned copies that he had handed off. And then it was in that last session in which his character started looking at the different flutes and then noticed that he was given a copy, and which kind of sent him into a somewhat of a rage, and him being a hot-headed character decided to take some of his mercenaries that they hired, the hired guns, so to speak, hired swords, and try to track down the carpenter. And it was on the way back that I rolled a random encounter, and it happened to be those wolf people showing up again. And they're getting more feral. I tried to make a point of, in the way I describe them, I don't want it to be too obvious. I'm okay if they don't understand it. It's not something where I want them to really piece it together. What I really want as far as these descriptions is when it finally kind of comes out, they'll be able to go, oh, now I get it. So this is not these were not clues that they need to have, but in part of my descriptions, I tried to relate how they're more feral, more animalistic. They're not really as well in control of the wolfish parts of their nature. He ended up surviving the encounter, but lost the wagon driver, but he did take down one of the wolf folk. So this episode starts, he's got the wolf folk corpse, he's got the corpse of the driver, but he also has to explain a little bit, at least to the satisfaction of the other players, their characters anyway, what was he doing out there? And the cover story that he's been able to stick with, because nobody's questioned him super hard on it, was I was looking for someone else in my order, couldn't find them, got waylaid on the way back. And some of that is true. The only thing that's not true really about it is he wasn't looking for someone of his order. He was looking for that carpenter who ran out of town right after they left town. So the trail by the time he got there was way cold, and the guy was way far ahead of him. Basically, without any kind of special ways to trace him, this guy's gone. So he explained that again last night to begin the game, and I also wanted them to. It was a good way of re-encapsulating. Okay, where did we start? We've been off a couple weeks, and everyone's busy. We only play for a couple hours, so I don't expect everything to be fresh in their minds. So we were able to say, okay, this is what happened. So you got these two corpses. You're in the shop or your HQ, basically. And then I put it to him. I say, what do you want to do? I said, I'm at your disposal. I don't know what you guys are planning to do. You guys, we didn't leave it as far as having a default. This is what we're doing next. So I'm really relying on you guys to tell me what your game plan is. And then feel free to talk about it. I'm trying to stress to them, hey, use Discord. We're in Discord. Use Discord. Use the tools. You want to work things out during the week. They don't tend to. Discord tends to be something that we'll obviously use during the game, and then we'll kind of hit it up between sessions if someone can't make it, or the day of, just we'll check in. Hey, are we still on for tonight? Is everybody making it? That kind of thing. They haven't yet taken advantage of Discord. The one thing I did before that at the end of that last session, is I basically made a players only text channel. I think I forget what I called it. I might have called it prep. I might have called it something, but I specifically said to them, and I reiterated yesterday, here's this channel where you guys can talk amongst yourselves. It's not for asking me questions. In fact, I'm going to mute that channel. I'm not going into that channel. That channel's for you. I think it's nice to give players that kind of option. Sure, they could set up DMs in Discord. I don't know if these guys use Discord a whole lot outside the game. This way, we can keep it in the server. It's there. If something comes up and I do have to jump in, I guess I have the option to, though it's my intention is really to stay out of it, but they can just kind of keep it in there. And then if they want to plan stuff, they want to talk things out, either without me eavesdropping, I want to know their plan, obviously, when they put it into motion, but I don't need to be in all the steps. And they can bounce out of that channel to ask me a question if they need my clarification on something, or if there's something that they feel like they should know, but they can't actually find it. They can ask me that kind of thing, but they haven't tended to use it. So I thought that this session was going to be a lot of that. Okay, we're going to be sort of planning things out, and as I'm listening to them, then I can sort of think about what's happening. They decided to do something interesting. It wasn't wholly unexpected, but wasn't really sure they were going to do it. So first thing they examined the body. There's really nothing special about the body, though. Again, I tried to reiterate how it's more animalistic. I did try to play it a little bit vague because they hadn't really looked at these wolf folk under fine microscopes before. So you could argue that they're always like this and they just never saw them really up close before. Or if they wanted to be more investigative, they could ask, they could ask me questions about things. They didn't. They kind of took it as read, but I talked about how their claws were elongated, how they had more of a sort of fur. Their faces were had more of a canine aspect, kind of a wolfishness to it. They do have a couple of hirelings. They have a scholar. They've got a barber surgeon. They've got a few sort of knowledge folk around, and they did have them kind of examine them briefly, but they didn't ask the questions. Not that I thought that they need to ask, but they might have asked some things about if they felt like what kind of state they were in. Because I was trying to sort of say they weren't in the fully humanoid state, but they obviously were not fully in the animal state. And I reiterated that, hey, when they attacked you, yes, they threw their spears, but when they got in close, they had a long curved knife. Never used it, was using claws, which to me was a little bit of a hint that they're not thinking clearly on a human level. They're getting a little bit more animal. So they just went to their natural weapons as opposed to using steel, using knives, using swords, that sort of thing. It didn't trigger anything for them, but again, this wasn't a clue. There's no real mystery about it. It'd be something of interest. So I felt like, okay, they're not interested in it. Fine. But they did check it out briefly. I think they were more interested in, is there loot? Like, are they carrying magic rings? Do they have any magic on them? Do they have any treasure? No, they didn't. And I also try to iterate that these guys weren't in great shape. Not physically, but I mean, they looked like they'd been a little bit worn. The clothes were worn. Everything looked like it was a little bit, besides just the kind of corpse smell. They kind of had a BO smell. Clothes are a little bit ratty, could use some mending, dirty. Trying to, again, illustrate that they maybe are in a more desperate state, or perhaps it's because they're undergoing this lunar transformation that they're just not taking care of themselves. They don't look particularly prosperous. So we covered all that. Now, part of the party's goals, or at least one of them, was the whole reason why they were going to the Caves of Chaos. And let me flip over here so I can bring up my mind map with all kinds of crazy stuff on it now. Just gets crazier and crazier. I highlighted in yellow on the mind map, if you're able to look at it, the couple of new wrinkles that I've added in. So one of the goals of the party had been to they had this rumor, or they'd been kind of told by the wolf folk that the clan leader had been captured and was taken somewhere, Caves of Chaos, held in caves by goblins. So they had that piece of information. They'd really been sort of hot to trot to rescue him, to forge some kind of alliance, or if not alliance, then cement a positive relationship with these wolf folk. The wolf folk had relocated from their prior home, kind of at the direction of the party, closer to Nobbs Hill and these sort of areas under control of the Viscount. And they had already had a couple of violent clashes with the town's guard. So, and they found that out pretty quickly. And the wolf folk are sort of their current whereabouts, where their hangout is, where their temporary home is unknown, but it's somewhere in the hills. But this idea was, okay, we're going to rescue the leader, and maybe help them find a new place to live. We'll get this great relationship. But now they're back in town with this corpse. They also know that the Viscount had put a bounty on pelts, scalps for the wolf folk. He doesn't care about forming any relationships. He just sees them as a threat to his power. There'd already been some skirmishes with his men. At one point, they had found the original wolf folk camp, and they had seen that the wolf folk had actually taken a couple of guards prisoner. They didn't really do anything about it. They just took the information and were able to sneak away without being seen. So they knew that there were, beyond the bounties, that a lot of ill will between the wolf folk and the town at this time. They were sort of playing this game, I think, of, okay, maybe we can make friends with the wolf folk and then we can figure out how to make it work in terms of brokering a deal with the Viscount. I'm not sure what their end game was once they did this, but it seemed to be the way they were going. But now they're in town, they've got this corpse, and they decide to go collect the bounty. I was a little bit surprised by that. I wasn't sure they were going to go that way with it. When they took the corpse, I thought, oh, this is probably a good idea for them. But I was thinking more along the terms of them being able to examine it. If they really wanted to get in and dig into it, it would have been something, oh, they can examine the corpse, get some information out of it, see that the transformation's going on, see a little bit. But in this case, it was like, okay, they're gonna turn it in. And I asked them, I said, okay, you're in your HQ in town. The corpse is lying on the floor. The castle is essentially where you need to turn it in. Think about how you want to do this. I wanted them to give them an opportunity to set the stage. Are they going to try to be subtle? Are they going to have somebody go out and tell a guard and go out and whisper around saying, hey, we've got a body, where can we drop it off? How do they want to do it? Do they want to be bold and set the corpse up like you would see in photos from the Old West, right, where you get you see the outlaw's body, in the coffin or something laid out, but for display? Do you want to put it outside because they have a shop where they're giving away haircuts and other barber surgery? Do they want to set up some kind of display of the wolf folk and do that? Do they want to do something completely different? How do they want to handle it? And it's interesting too, because it's 100 gold pieces, 100 gold coins for each of these scalps, which is, for a normal townsfolk, very serious coin. But the party, not so much. They've got a good nest egg of wealth. So it wasn't something that they really needed the coin, which made it, which also led to it being a bit of an interesting decision to chase the coin. But maybe they had other ideas. But I really left it to them. How do you want to present this thing, or not? How do you want to make this happen? Because I told them there's not a service. There's not 188 corpses for kids or something. If you've ever seen the Cars for Kids commercials or anything like that, someone's going to come by and pick it up and give you your tax write-off of 100 gold pieces. That's not happening. So you really needed to arrange it. And I left it to them to see how they wanted to do that. But I wanted to put it in their brains. Think about the kind of presentation you want to have with this, especially given that the town had been sort of turned against them by Bogwig. How they acted was important. So I wanted them to think about that. Now, nothing says collecting the bounty on the body of a member of a group you want to befriend is an interesting move. It is. They're kind of getting into that zone of playing two sides against the middle. I always think of that. There was a movie in the 90s. I think it was called Romeo is Bleeding. I don't even remember if I even saw the movie, but I love the trailer because there's this point where the guy says, there's a voiceover, I think, of the protagonist in the trailer. And he says, I played both sides against the middle and I lost. Right. And they're definitely into that. Seem to be playing a little bit of that, right? They're trying to make friends with the wolf folk out here, but now in here, they're going to be playing up the fact that they are champions of the town. And I don't know what all the consequences of it will be going forward, but that's what they did. And so when I came back to them, I gave them a couple minutes to think about it. I think I went and got a drink or something. I said, okay, how do you want to do this? The dwarf said, all right, I'm just going to fling this thing over my shoulders, just like fireman's carry style. And I made a reference to the classic Errol Flynn Robin Hood movie. If you've seen that movie, I don't know how you couldn't have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, towards more or less in the beginning, he kills one of the king's deer and brings it to Prince John's banquet, and he's got it over his shoulders. It's just kind of a boss move, right? And I don't know if that's what he had in mind, but I threw that reference at him. He seemed to enjoy it, and so they left the building with this corpse over his shoulders and just started marching up towards the castle. And I narrated how people saw it. I mean, it's a corpse. You have it on the dwarf, so the wolf folk aren't huge, but they're human sized. The dwarf is stocky but shorter. And I said it was, at first people are wondering like, what is he doing? And then they saw the claws, and I mentioned that they were barefoot, so they saw the claws on the feet and the arms and the everything. And so then the whispers start to go out, oh, it's one of the wolf folk. Oh my gosh, they killed one of the wolf folk. And people immediately know where they're going. And I talked about how the people in the street are kind of partying like the Red Sea for them, giving them this lane to the up to the castle. At the same time, they're crowding around the sides and the back. And so they're almost being sort of pushed by the crowd up to the castle. And there are people who are running ahead of them, saying word of what they think is happening. And the party, I don't think they expected this, because I saw a couple of the players were in voice chat, so I can look at everybody's screens, and I'm looking at their reactions as I'm narrating this. I think clearly it seemed like at least, well, there was only 3 of them. I think at least 2 of the 3, maybe the guy playing the dwarf kind of understood the moment a little bit, but the other ones were a little kind of taken aback, and they gave them sort of a shot in the arm of like, oh my God, like this is it. This is our chance. Bogwig had kind of stolen the town from them, and now they're getting it back. People are excited for them. They've got this new moment to build upon. So I decided I'm gonna keep building this moment, and I talk about it. They get to the castle, and they've got that swagger, and they're going, and there's steps that lead up to the landing with the portcullis is raised, and the great doors are closed, and there's a number of guards, but there's also I sort of some kind of foppish entourage, kind of muckety muck, I think I call them, someone who's clearly part of the castle bureaucracy, wearing mail and has a sword, but is definitely not a warrior type, but is in sort of fine linen garments, and is waiting there with the troops. And I let them have this moment of, okay, you are taking up these steps. You see the people just all gathered below, and they're all kind of waiting, and they kind of made a point of I forget exactly what they said, but it was some kind of like, yeah, we did it. Like, we're the Quers and we killed it. Yeah. So they really embraced the moment. Now, whether long-term this will work well for them or not, who's to say, but they embraced this moment of the returning sort of prodigal heroes, returning, making good on what the town needed. And I have the crowd, start to cheer first, kind of in clumps, because it's not turning everybody immediately. But a lot of these things are, you have what happened, and then this is kind of newer. This threat is more than the threat that Bogwig was playing up. The idea of the party as sort of these marauders who just beat down the working class folk for their day-to-day, right? The kind of bullies that take your lunch money and then try to portray themselves as your friends is a threat. But the wolf folk on the sort of threat level for the town is a lot higher. It's a lot more immediate. The bullies is something that is a long-term theme, which will always be good. But in the short term, the bullies haven't taken down one of these wolf folk who I don't think had been taken down before. There were no reports of the town being able to successfully kill one, at least for the moment, sort of overshadowed that. So they started to get kind of more support and more applause and more sort of cheers in this moment. And then this courtier type turns to them and says, you're the first ones to have collected this bounty. So the Lord Viscount wants to present you with your reward personally. In other words, you're going to get an audience. This audience is something that they've been trying to get to for a long time. I mean, really, since the game began, one of the first things they were talking about, even when only the dwarf player and one other guy who ended up leaving were playing, they were, from the beginning, were all about how can we get to the Viscount? How we can get an audience to the Viscount? And I would tell them, hey, the Viscount's not just going to see you. You guys are just some dudes off the street. You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to find a way. You're going to have to find a way to get through to someone who knows somebody, or you're going to have to make a big sort of landing to get in front of the Viscount. And he's just not going to see people. And one of their plans had been previously that maybe they were going to hang around and try to get an audience through the weekly audiences that the Viscount sort of has to do as part of his duties to kind of adjudicate cases. So and so took my chickens, and now I want my recompense, kind of thing. And he does have to sit through those. So they were gonna try to maybe potentially sit in line and try to get in that way, but then they kind of changed their minds when it seemed like the castle was more antagonistic towards them, I think, than they had imagined. But now they've got the audience, and I talk about, okay, the doors open, and they kind of laid out, there are guards blocking you from getting into parts of the castle you're not supposed to get into, but essentially they are marched into the kind of audience chamber. And I tried to play up that the workmanship is great, but it's kind of dingy. I mean, this guy has not been a good Viscount. He hasn't been someone who has led the town to renewed prosperity. He hasn't even been able to really hold on to whatever prosperity they had before. So everything is a little bit ratty, a little bit dingy. It's dusty. It's threadbare in its own way. There's probably an interesting parallel between the wolf folk being sort of threadbare and worn and in need of mending, and also the Viscount in his hall, threadbare, worn out, in need of mending. I mentioned how the Viscount's kind of middle-aged, sort of pudgy, has a comb over that's not particularly well done. I even kind of made a little joking hint that he could use a haircut from Low Cuts, that we would probably never stoop to go get one. It's just not very well kempt. And I have them, go down the hall and through the middle of the sort of the lane between the two sides of where there, generally pews or benches. And then I have essentially instructed to drop the body, and the Viscount speaks, and he doesn't really care, but this was kind of their moment. Unfortunately, maybe because they weren't prepped for the moment, they didn't. This was I guess for me, I looked at it as like, here's your chance to just I was looking for, okay, just be bold, because you got this spot, but you don't have a lot of time. The guy doesn't have a lot of patience. He doesn't have a lot of anything. And there was a funny moment where there's not really one group leader. So the one guy blurted out like, "We are the Quarriors," and then the Viscount goes like, "Who?" And I can see the other players like, "Oh, why did you mention Quarriors?" Like, and then like he starts to ask his. I mentioned how the Viscount and his daughter have this little sidebar, and the Viscount doesn't care who hears it. So, like, the daughter whispers something to him that they can't really hear, and then the Viscount says something loudly, like, "Well, why doesn't he come forth and confront, whatever?" And then the whispers something else, and, "Oh, he's sick. Okay, well, whatever then, kind of, never mind." And my idea for this was I wanted to display, and I don't know yet if it worked or not, I wanted to communicate through the absence of Bogwig, because the one thing that was missing, you had the Viscount, you had some courtiers, you had a bunch of guards, no Bogwig. And Bogwig has been staying in the castle. Bogwig, I think they had thought, has the ear of the Duke, or the Viscount rather, which he does, but more or less it's more the daughter whose influence he has right now. But Bogwig's not there. Why isn't Bogwig there? Bogwig is showing his cowardice. He is showing that he doesn't feel all that strongly about his hand of cards here. He had a chance to, as you can imagine, you're in the castle, maybe you're on the battlements or somewhere that has an eye down to the street. You could see it coming from, a mile away, this procession with the Quarriors, the adventurers coming up. People are talking, I'm sure people are coming into the castle. Oh my gosh, these guys, they took down a wolf folk. Like, oh my gosh, isn't that crazy or amazing or whatever? Oh, they're going to pick up the bounty. Oh, they're coming. And Bogwig basically begs off, right? I'm sure off camera, I imagine that the Viscount or the daughter or whatever wants Bogwig to be there. And maybe even the expectation would be that Bogwig could finally put it to these villains, right? He'd accuse this group of some fairly serious villainy, and here you can kind of finally put it to them in front of the gods and the Viscount and everybody. Bogwig doesn't show. Bogwig claims to be sick. He's showing weakness of character, and he's showing maybe weakness of his argument. He begs off. He pretends to be ill, and he can't show, which leaves the players with their characters with an opportunity to make, much had Bogwig had done when they weren't there, make an argument to the Viscount without really any chance of real objection. Bogwig's not there. Bogwig may be able to answer anything they say after the fact, but they get a chance to kind of put their case to the Viscount with zero interruption, with zero input from Bogwig. He has essentially ceded the floor to them out of cowardice and out of fear, essentially. I imagine Bogwig in his chambers, this thing going on, almost making preparations to flee. I could see him thinking if the party is able to turn the tide down there, that he's got to be ready to get out somewhere. I imagine him skulking near a back door or near some way he could slip out if he needs to, if things go really poorly. So the Viscount loudly blurts out that basically Bogwig has begged out due to being ill. And so this idea of having kind of an impromptu trial of the couriers or to sort of Bogwig to put accusations to them, he essentially hand waves away, leaving a great opening for the party. Do they take it? Frederick Ork says, hey, Frederick, I'm going to post these up on Reddit as a teaching tool to map out a campaign. One of the better video series on it. Oh, thanks. I'm happy to make a graphic of this mind map if you think it'll be helpful to folk. I'll get into it in a minute, just because I'm trying to kind of neaten it up a little bit, and we can go over I'll go through the kind of the highlighted sections that as we get to them. But thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it. So here is this moment. What does the party do? They basically make a joke. Oh, Bogwig's sick. He's got STDs. This is going back to that one player whose character is just hell bent on setting up this whole argument of Bogwig being some kind of deviant, some kind of sexual deviant with sexually transmitted diseases. So the moment just kind of falls flat, and the king is just, I might keep calling different ones. The Viscount is just kind of, like, what are you talking about? And then he just starts to kind of like, now he's getting bored. It's like, this is where I really was thinking, if somebody just comes in and just goes strong, I didn't have any really preference of what they're going to say. I was like, your moment, like, here it is. They're all waiting for you to say something. And they come on and say, he's got STDs. Yuck, yuck, yuck. And then I was like, okay, there was they had a little margin. I rolled some dice to see basically how much time I thought they had. Didn't have much. And so they kind of blew that moment. They did get in a little petty shot at Bogwig, but nothing that was going to dislodge him from this place. Bogwig will have to answer for his weakness or try to play it off, because it will be a little bit suspicious that of all days to be ill, this was the one day to do that. But he's silver-tongued in his own way. He'll be able to recover, and as we'll see in a few minutes, he's got multiple things going on that he's trying to do. The party do get their gold, and they do go back out of the castle, and they're continuing to sort of revel in this new adulation of the crowds. Now, nothing says, I love it trying to audience for 3 months of real time. They get the chance, swing and a miss. Yeah, it happens, right? I was kind of hoping they could take a better swing than just making a STD joke, like, he's got gonorrhea, ha ha ha. But look, in their defense, they had no idea this was going to happen. This was totally unexpected on their behalf, so they weren't prepped for it. They're a little bit out of, I think the absence of not playing, it didn't, they weren't necessarily in super focus, but yeah, it's a little bit like, here you have 5 minutes to say something. You finally get there. I mean, and frankly, it's been more than 3 months. I mean, if we want to talk in like real time, it's probably been a year or more. Cause like I said, right from the very beginning, when we first started playing, like one of their first questions as I dropped them into this town is, how can we get to the Viscount? I mean, it's like number one, where I had to say, okay, slow your roll. You guys are level 1 nobodies. Nobody cares about you yet, right? But this was like one of their long-term plans. And yeah, they kind of let the chance go without taking a better thing. But now I think they understand. One thing it has given them is they understand now the avenues by which to get to the Viscount. And that was, now they're thinking, if worst comes to worst, get more pelts. Like, they literally is also at the back of their mind of, oh, but maybe if we get more pelts. And someone else said, But the audience is only for the first bounty. It was true. I made a point of saying that because they were the first to collect the bounty, they got an audience. The Viscount isn't granting an audience every time you show up with a pelt, or corpse or body, some proof of death. The first one. So I already said to them, yeah, you're gonna have to. This was a one-time thing, right? You're gonna have to up the ante a little bit. But I see that already. They're already working in their brains of, they already were mentioning, okay, if we go and we're able to rescue that wolf guy, do we rescue him and free him, or do we rescue him and take a prisoner back to the Viscount? I mean, they're already like hedging their bets with all these different relationships. They're ready to cash in the wolf folk. They feel like maybe it would help with the Viscount. I really have no idea what their end game is to all this, but they are really willing to sell out Peter to pay Paul, or vice versa. They're keeping all of their options open. They're starting to get more, I guess, realpolitik in a way. They're really getting that kind of pragmatism of, okay, we want powerful allies. We can't get them by hook, we'll get them by crook. But this one, the audience didn't maybe go as well as, I don't know, I can't say as well as maybe as well as I hoped, right? They, I think, got out of it. They were not disappointed with what they got out of it, which is at least they got a little bit of face time with the Viscount in a positive way. Bogwig wasn't there to throw out any kind of answers or just besmirch them or sort of ruin the moment. They got to have this moment in the sun alone, and they had not had a lot of positivity. The way that just the dice have gone, and me having fun with this kind of curse ideas, right? They've had a lot of things kind of go south on them recently in different ways. So finally, this kind of, I feel like for them, they saw the clouds opening and this ray of sunshine beaming down on them. And I think part of it is they just loved basking in the glow. So when they come out of the castle to the adulation of the crowds, they decide to keep it rolling. And they go down to first they were going to do something else. Oh, they were going to go down to their shop to try to kind of promote the barber surgery. But then one of the other ones was like, no, we should just go to the tavern. And so I mentioned how all the folk are following, or not, obviously not everybody in town, but a whole lot of people are following the tavern, and they're all waiting. They're waiting for those magic words. Like I really described how they're kind of, no one's ordering any drinks in the tavern, in the pub. They're all waiting. You can see them licking their lips, and they're, say the magic words. And of course, eventually they say, drinks are on the house, right? Drinks are on us. And then the crowd goes wild. Yeah. And then at that point, I said, look, we don't have to role play through these little encounters. We can kind of just talk about through what you guys are going to do. And they talk about how they just want to keep reinforcing their image as the good guys. They're trying to reframe their messaging to be about sort of folk of the people, right? These are the couriers are adventurers of the people and for the people. And when I rolled up their bar tab at the end, they ended up spending 130 gold or 1,300 silver pieces on that. So they actually lost money. They actually had to kick in 10 gold pieces to cover the tab. But they also felt that was well worth it. It was well worth what they did for what they felt they got out of it. And I think they're hoping now that they've sort of turned a corner and they're going to have a bunch of positivity. Of course, Bogwig is still there. The curse is still on, and they're getting ready to leave town. And I don't know how long they're going to be gone. It'll be interesting. I always try to track time, right, as usual. But, I think it's going to be interesting. I got to set up some kind of fronts for Bogwig as to, well, I already have something that we'll get into in a minute that he's trying to do, that he's going to try to do. But, they're leaving in high spirits, but things are going to turn again because it's just the way things are working for them, and they're not going to be there to build up on it. They're going to be gone for who knows how long. So they got this moment. What's going to happen when they're gone? I don't know. And they even said something which is funny. They kind of made reference to the fact that I tend to pull up these kind of consequences or something. I forget exactly what they said, but it kind of made me chuckle because they're starting to recognize that, consequences, these things happen, and that they can't kind of rest too much on their laurels. The other thing they mentioned, which I hadn't even mentioned to them, and I was really, I don't know, happy. It made me feel good. They mentioned it as they talked about. So they had two of their fighter types, two of their mercenaries got injured when the fight with the wolflings, and they were wondering if they should wait till they're healed or not. And I rolled some dice. That's going to take them about 4 days to heal up. or they can try to heal up on the road. It'll just take longer. And they were going back and forth. And one of the players said something like, well, like, who cares if we just wait 4 days? What difference does it make? And one of the other players said is, well, we know that the wolfling, their chief is being held by those goblins in caves. We don't know what that time frame is like. We don't necessarily have 4 days. Like, we can't afford to just give days away, waiting around. Like, we don't know what's happening. We kind of gotta go. And I thought that, well, that was a really good comment. Like, I was like, I hadn't said anything about that being a particular ticking clock, though it is. But even without me saying it, they kind of recognize, like, no, we got places to go, and they'd been kind of putting off getting to the caves, right? They were going to go originally, then they backed around, they came around, they kind of took their time resting. They've been already kind of taking a lot of time. And so I thought it was kind of savvy by the players sort of recognizing themselves. The world's not standing still for us. We can't guarantee what's happening out there while we're gone. And every day we're sitting around here is a day that we're not getting closer to getting back to where we need to be. So we got to go. So I was really kind of pumped about that. It's probably one of those things that the players would never look at and think like, wow, our GM was like so psyched that we said that, or it was so meaningful to them. But I was really like, yeah, I'm like super proud of these guys. Like, that was really good to think about. They're starting to think about the world as a place that is changeable, right? It's not fixed. It's not just waiting for them to do. And I guess on that note, just to not to sidetrack too much, but at the beginning of the session, one of the other players, the one who's probably the newest to role playing in general, asked the one who had gone off on their own little side adventure, like, wow, how did you do that? Or like, I didn't know we could do that. He didn't know. And the guy said, he's like, yeah, I just told Todd, this is what I want to do. And Todd said, okay, we'll handle it. We'll do it. And I reiterated, yeah, you can, if you want to go off on your own side adventure, hopefully, he was trying to do it in a subtle way where he didn't think he'd miss any time and anyone would notice, and it didn't work out that way. But, do what you got. If you feel like your character's got something to do, needs to do something, do it. We'll figure it out. There's nothing in the game that says, no, you cannot do it. And I just say that to kind of make a point of new players in particular may not know the freedom that they have. That if this player feels like his character wants to go to do something by themselves, either in town or in the next town, or wants to kind of take some time to handle their own business, or maybe they have a backstory thing that just interests them, or like this other guy, he wanted to do something on the down low because he's doing something a little bit dirty. He needs it to be on the down low. So these things are possible, right? That you can do it. You just need to talk to me about it, and we'll figure out how to get it done. So you might want to keep that in mind if you have new players. Say to them, reiterate to them, keep on them about, hey, the freedom is yours, the choice is yours. And I usually will bring that up fairly often of, hey, the choice is yours, right? You guys said you wanted to go here at the end of the last session. If you've changed your mind between then and now, just tell me. I'm not going to force you down a path. In this case, is, hey, if you got something you wanted to handle on your own business, you got your own business you want to do, tell me about it. We'll figure it out. Don't feel like you can't because of, I don't even know what reason. I didn't ask them, well, why did you think you couldn't? I just said, you absolutely can. Just talk to me. Just tell me, and we'll figure out how to make it happen. Let's see. Now, nothing says, yeah, that player gets it. It's not a video game. Zones don't load as you get near them. Exactly. Right. Everything is happening. But it's something I haven't generally reminded them of. And I guess if I was going to self-analyze, I wonder if it's been the fact that these chads that they have left, the dangling chads, to use an old election metaphor, if they've recognized that since these dangling chads have kind of come back to them, the things that they've left hanging out there and not really tied with a bow and neatened up, that they tend to sort of re-emerge, and usually for the worse so far, that if they leave this thing hanging out there, that it's not just going to sit and wait for it to resolve. It's probably going to resolve into something that is not good for them. Maybe that's it. I can't say. I don't know, but maybe I'm not going to ruin the moment by trying to pick it apart and analyze how they got there, but I'm just glad that they got there. So they arranged for the funeral for Limbaugh, the driver. Rest in peace, poor Limbaugh. And they did it. I think they did a good job. They sent their servant out there. Terrence, hey Terrence. Dangling chads better than dangling virgins, I suppose. They can all dangle. Everybody can go take a dangle. They decided to make arrangements for Limball. I think it cost them about 50 silver. And I just lumped that all together as kind of all the fees and the right things, and to get some professional mourners and get the Order of the White Flame to do a nice little service, blah blah blah. Do that, and they decided we're not even going to wait. We're gonna leave that. They left some people behind, including their 2 injured mercenaries, because they said they wanted to go sort of light and fast. It felt like they're trying to make up time. But the other thing that they came up with, which was interesting, and I hadn't thought about it, it makes perfect sense. I just hadn't thought about it, is that when they'd gone around to find the Caves of Chaos, which, whatever, they got close to the Caves of Chaos, they got to this withered wood area the last time, there was a road that led from a ford of the river that led basically straight to the withered wood. And it does, if they were to stay on it, it would lead through to the Caves of Chaos. They don't know it yet because they just didn't get that far. They started the process of going the other way. Okay, it crosses the ford back into the hills. Nobbs Hill, and kind of the area they're most familiar with, is on essentially the far side of this line of hills. If they can find that road, then that gives them a straight line or a more or less clear path from settled areas, or at least calm down areas, to this spot. And they want to find it. And they presume that this road does indeed get all the way through, find the road, and they can beeline in. And when they have to go back and forth, they'll basically have a shortcut and not have to do what they were doing before, which was taking the regular road down to the bridge at Quarry Bridge, and then back up through the river somewhere to find the ford and go across. And I thought, this is a great idea. And I hadn't really thought about, well, where does that road leave? It's just one of those things. Where does the road leave when it leaves this area? I hadn't really thought about it. But to me, when they said it, I was like, yeah, that does make perfect sense. Now, I'm going to have to think about, okay, but people aren't using that road. And there are multiple reasons for that. One, it's not going anywhere that anybody wants to go. Anybody who gets that withered wood, not going to make it much further without luck or assistance. And even if they do kind of make it through to the other side, to those Caves of Chaos, they're probably not coming back out. And even if they were to make it to the Caves of Chaos, turn around, run away, and not get all the way back, they're certainly going to tell everybody, stay the heck away from there. There's nothing that anyone's found that's valuable. There's no reason for anybody to really be taking that road. But I imagine there's maybe something else, maybe something haunted. Maybe there's an old watchtower, something that's on the other side of the river, kind of something that's in some kind of pass, maybe that this road has to go through, and that's got something going on that's going to keep people away from it. So it'll be interesting. But this concept of, I'm just calling it for my purposes here, and I've highlighted it just to kind of highlight that it's new, the old road. So we now have this new connection here. And I tried to kind of differentiate my arrows. This color here I'm using in the mind map is probably too light. I need to get a darker green. But these colors with the arrows are geographical connections here, as opposed to, say, from the Wolf Folk to Nobbs Hill, it's more of a relationship. There's just sort of, in this case, it's static, but shows some kind of connection. So now we've got this new connection that is the wilderness to the old road. And I'll just turn this off so I can move things a little bit more. To the old road, to the withered wood. If you can see that, okay. And I apologize if you're listening to this audio later and you can't see it very well. I'll try to link to, I'll try to make an image capture of this where I can post it somewhere, so I can at least include it with the podcast description when that goes out. So we got this new connection here to the old road. So they're trying to find it. So they left Nobbs Hill early in the morning, first light, and they decided, because the river comes out and it does go, Nobbs Hill essentially is on a hilltop, but a hilltop that the river runs next to, so that they can catch the river there, try to follow it down from Nobbs Hill, find that same fording, and then find wherever that fording is and try to find where it comes out of the hill. So they were going to try to kind of find it that way, which again makes perfect sense. Having the river is going to make navigation fairly easy, though I did mention that where it was running through the hills further to the south, where they first picked it up, they were on the far side. It was a little bit more approachable, had more gentler slopes and areas where they could walk better. They don't know what it's like up here, and it may not be as easy to follow to track by the river as they were before. And sure enough, as I was narrating it, it's going to pose some difficulties. They may have to kind of depart the river for a while and zigzag a bit and come back to it. Also, I talked about more elevation changes where sometimes they have to go further up the sides of the hills where there's kind of rocky ravines and more gorge like segments of the river that they have to contend with, which they can't just walk by, and the river's too rough. They didn't even think about saying, "Oh, we'll take a boat down the river." It's a bit too rough. In fact, this part of the river is not really navigable by boats. The locals don't use it to use for those purposes. They use the wagon, the main road. So they went. But one thing that was interesting is, so they exited town, first light. I rolled up a random encounter came up. I rolled up adventuring party. So I'm sort of narrating them coming out of the town, going down to the river. I'm thinking in my brain, what does it mean? An adventuring party. So I'm thinking about it, and I think I feel like I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this. I decided that Bogwig had put together his own band of adventurers, which I'm just calling informally the Bogwig's Bunch. I put down here Bogwig's Bunch, and I rolled. I used just in the expert set where they have the wilderness encounters, and I rolled a 7. So I'm also sort of calling them the Gang of 7. I know there's a Gang of 7 economic, I think political organization of world leaders and whatnot. But I'm using that the Bogwig's Bunch, aka the Gang of 7. And I think maybe what I'm thinking is that the Gang of 7 will be an adventuring party, more or less villainous, definitely not good guys, who Bogwig is sort of repackaging as Bogwig's Bunch. In any case, these guys are actually ahead of the party, and they're also descending or following the river. And the party, because they're so earnest, calls out to them, hey, I think we're trolling the same way. Like, what are you guys doing? And I have the guys not be super hostile, but they certainly showing that they are competitors. They talked about how they're going to get their own pelts. Like, you're not the only guys that can go get pelts. We're going to go get pelts. We're going to, you guys got that first bounty, but we're coming. You're not the only people out here. And I did try to describe that these guys they're not farmers. They look like they have some, that they're fairly, if not amazingly well equipped, then they're equipped to the point where that they at least mean business, or at least visually you would think they mean business. They've got mail. They've got, some of them have shields, and they have swords. They look like they know how to use them. It's not like when the peasants from the Seventh Samurai put on the samurai armor they found, and it looks like, a kid putting on their parents, their dad's clothes, right? Or it's just all oversized and nothing fits right. Like, these guys look like they're at least semi-professional. And the party they have some kind of jibes back and forth. The party really wants to be helpful, but these guys don't really want anything of it. But I do have them say, as they want to one-up the party, that Bogwig gave them a map. And I don't know if the party really made the connection of how much, like, what does this mean as far as Bogwig giving them a map mean? Because if I'm thinking that Bogwig is really sponsoring these guys, that he is kind of setting them up to do dirt for him. And I don't know if the party thinks that, or if the party just thinks, oh, they got a map from Bogwig. Bogwig sold them a map, or somehow they got one. I'm thinking that, Bogwig's map's going to be good. He's been out on those hills. He knows the area pretty well. And I was thinking he might actually know where the wolf folk are, or at least where they were at one time, whether they're still there or not. And we've talked in other recap and prep chats whether the wolf folk had captured Bogwig at one point. And that may very well be. It seems like it is sort of developing that maybe Bogwig and the wolf people have already had run-ins. So this group is ahead of the party, and they seem to be moving off. The party decides to just follow them. I think they stayed about 120 feet away, or some distance away, which is about where I rolled up the encounter distance anyway. they follow them down. And again, I was talking about the ruggedness of the terrain and the elevation changes. And sometimes they're able to kind of hug the river closely, and other times they're kind of going up elevations. But then I show them, okay, where they're on sort of top of one particular rise, about 30 feet off of the river, 30 feet up from there. And these adventuring party stop to, seems like they're looking at something, and then they veer off and take another path. They go off. The party comes up to that same crossroads, so to speak. They could see something that might be a trail, but it might just be nothing that they seem to be following. And then but it's not following at this point. It's going veering off of following the river course, following at this point, the kind of cliff edge, because we're kind of on these sort of parts of the hills where it's a lot of these rocks and rock faces. So that you kind of imagine kind of a cliff edge with sort of trees and bushes and things like that they have been following so far. And we were running. We played about 2 hours, which is usually our limit. I know it. I wish we could play kind of longer, but it's just not how it tends to go, just with everybody's obligations and when we have to start and when we tend to have to end. So their initial thought was to continue following the river and not to deviate to follow these other guys. I was thinking that that's probably a good plan, because my idea was that these guys were going to try to ambush the party somewhere down the line. That Bogwig's map was not leading to the wolf people, or not leading to anything, but it was leading to a point where they could try to push the players into a bad spot, maybe somewhere where the path, has to go through some area that a good ambush point, essentially, and that they could try to take out the party out in the hills. And then who knows, Bogwig could play it up however he wants, because that party would be gone. They'd be dead. If that holds true, and I don't know, next week we come back, whenever we play next, maybe they'll change their minds, and I'll get to have my ambush, or at least see if that ambush would be successful. I'm not sure what Bogwig's, if he's given them secondary orders. I'm sure he has. I'm not sure what they would be. Maybe it would be to go after some wolf people if he thinks they can catch a couple of them away from the camp. Bogwig wouldn't send them into the teeth of their camp, but he might try to get them to. The wolf folk tend to wander, and they tend to roam their territory just for looking out purposes and scouting out, but also for food and things of that nature. So there are chances to run into them. Maybe he would send them where he thinks they could find one or two of them alone, which would give them maybe a fighting chance to bag one that way. That's probably his secondary plan. Bogwig doesn't know what the party's up to, so he doesn't really particularly know that they're trying to find that road that will lead them back to the Caves of Chaos. So I don't think he's operating on that principle yet. Though who knows, maybe something else will happen and the Gang of Seven will make their own independent decision, or they will do something. But that's where we left it. That was the end of the session. It was, they were at this kind of crossroads. They did use one of the dwarf did use this rune that he had unlocked at second level, which let him basically put a warning rune. So anything within the next hour that were to come back to where they were would cause him to know when it passed. It wouldn't give him it just is a very general rune of warning. If it's more than medium, if it's medium or larger size, and it passes through within an hour when he made the rune, then he'll basically know that something has passed. It could be deer, it could be a bear, it could be the adventurers, right? It could be anything, but at least he'll know. So if the group decides to backtrack and then follow the party within an hour, they would know something. But we'll see. I'll roll some dice for them. But that's where we left the session. So as you can see from that, a lot happened, but not a lot happened. Low adventuring, low fantasy, low adventuring gaming tonight. But it was great. I mean, these are the kind of sessions I really enjoy having. We got to amp up the intrigue a little bit more. The party didn't necessarily take advantage so much of the chances they had, but I think that they got a couple of wins. It's always good to get some wins. I'm not saying you should gift the party with wins, but in this case, it was something I felt like it was appropriate for the moment. That this, the party was definitely seen as sort of bad folk, but I didn't need to roll dice for it. I could have rolled dice. I could have rolled, let me roll morale, let me roll reactions, let me add some modifiers. I just felt like, look, I feel like in the circumstances, I think I know. I don't need to ask the dice how the people would react. The wolf folk had kind of shown themselves to be essentially an existential threat to the town, given what had happened in the other encounters between the people who were supposed to be protecting the town and and the wolf folk, i.e. the wolf folk basically wiping the floor with them, so to speak. So I didn't need to roll dice to know that when you have these kind of monster creatures, boogeymen, basically at your doorstep, that the bully who takes one down, you're probably going to think fondly of the bully, at least for a time, right? You're still going to have that guy who's whispering when this dies down about how bad the bullies are, and he's got his own ideas. If his gang are able to get a couple scalps, that again will help change the calculus. But for now, I thought that was a nice thing, and the party got to have a little bit of a win. Some of that glory they'd been so desperately seeking, they got a taste of it. Can they keep it going? I don't know. Who's to know? But they got it. None Nothing says these kinds of sessions are good. More can happen when less happens. Yes, and I think this is another reason why I like. This actually just came up on Facebook. Somebody was, I don't know why. I used to read the 5th edition groups more often than I do now, but I don't. But every once in a while, I'll sort of jump in there. And someone was asking, hey, I'm thinking about making, that whole kind of death save, or not death save, but, drop to 0, pop back up, drop to 0, right? People always are trying to find ways. Well, how do I eliminate this kind of bouncing up and down between 0 hit points? And one of the solutions has been to add exhaustion levels so that you can bounce up, but you're going to drop to 0. You're going to take exhaustion, so it becomes harder and harder, and you do get more consequences for dropping. And one of the replies was that it can cause sort of a death spiral, which you can see in a lot of circumstances. You're dropping, and you can never really get back up, and since every time if you do get back up, you are getting these quasi-permanent penalties, because in the short term, in terms of combat, you can't get rid of exhaustion during combat, so it's there for the whole duration. Makes you more likely to miss saves, miss rolls, do whatever, so you're just more likely to drop again, and then you're just spiraling downwards, which I get. But then they said, and is having your party spend time, between more time not adventuring, is that a good thing? And I thought, yeah, I think it is a good thing. I think too often people just speed through a lot of content to get back into the dungeons, to get back into some story. I've had the last 2 sessions I've run have had very little in the way of forward adventuring, and yet I think a lot got done. A lot of things have. I said in the description, or when I posted in the channel notes, how the pieces are moving, things are happening. Different factions, if you will, are making their moves. The party's able to not only develop themselves, see the consequences of their actions. The world is allowed to breathe. Things are allowed to happen, and it's hard to do that if you are racing from moment to moment. If you have to go back to town and spend a couple days resting, then stuff can happen in town, stuff can happen in the dungeon, stuff can happen in the wilderness between town and the dungeon. All these things can be related. Maybe 2 of them can be related. You have so much more to play with. And I think I just want to tell these GMs, boy, you really might be missing out if you think it would be some horrific thing if my party wasn't constantly in the dungeon or on some kind of mission. These have been some of my favorite sessions, and there's been nothing particular going on. I mean, they're really easy to prep, because all I really have to think about is the consequences of, if this happens, what do I think would happen? Okay, I know all the players already. They're in somewhere that's comfortable. It wasn't even like, we're going to go shopping and do something boring. No, it's just we're going to deal with these little things, but these little things lead to big things, and they need to be dealt with, and here you have a chance to deal with them. And if they're not going to deal with them, at least you have a chance to kind of explore them and give your party options. So, when you're thinking, if you're running these games, whether it's OSR, 5th edition, any other game, of how you can quicken the pace or keep them in the dungeon forever and ever, take the opposite tack and think about what kind of stuff can happen in town. Town doesn't have to just be this place you go to resupply and sleep. Lots of fun, interesting things can be in town. NPCs can show up, antagonists can show up. You can introduce all kinds of other wonderful opportunities for your party to get in and make some hay, or put their foot in their mouths, or create new alliances, or destroy older alliances, make friends, make enemies, all kinds of stuff that happen. Don't throw it away because you think, oh, I got to get them to the next dungeon. The next dungeon is going to be there. They're going to go back to the Caves of Chaos. I'm not worried about it. And even if they didn't, there's always another dungeon. There's always something else. I really like these sessions, but that's it. And I think our next session is next. I think we have it. I think we're going to set it for next. I think we set it for next Wednesday. So assuming that stays true, I will try to do a prep chat so you guys can hang out and let me figure out what I'm going to do next. Programming notes, just in general, I have Alyssa Faden's coming back to the channel tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, U.S. times, for a chat about mapping, cartography, gaming stuff. I think I want to hit. I know she does a lot of miniatures. She's a big miniatures person. I might try to, ping her brain about minis and stuff, because I am totally in the dark on anything to do with miniatures. But it should be fun. So I hope folks will join me for that. Not sure what I will stream about tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Today is Wednesday, so tomorrow, Thursday. Yeah, I don't know what I will do on Thursday. And then Friday, hopefully, will be the OSR, our weekly OSR Reddit roundup. So that's all going on. Any last things in the chat? Any questions, comments, anything else I can help with? Oh, yeah, and then hopefully next week sometime, maybe we'll start at least an intro to getting the Logan's Run project off the ground. I really didn't make. I took the poster art for Logan's Run and I slapped my own name and the word project on there. So I hesitate to even say that I made an image for it, but I did make an image for it in my own way. Much like someone who puts a TV dinner in the microwave has made a meal. But that'll hopefully coming up rather soon. I bought the disc. I put a link to the disc on Amazon. If you can find a way, if you find some way to if there's I don't post any illegal links, but if you see somewhere that it's streaming on a streaming service, I checked a few. I didn't religiously check everything. I couldn't find it, so I just bought the disc. I still like having the discs. Sometimes you end up in a spot where you don't have internet or your TV's not hooked up or blah, 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 but you can put the disc in. So I bought the disc. Hopefully you can find it so you can become acquainted or reacquainted with it. I'm going to try to watch it between now and the weekend, or tomorrow when I get the disc in the mail on the weekend, and take a bunch of notes. So I'll be ready for that. Terrence says minis, the sad relic of the age of in-person gaming. I don't know if sad. I mean, they're big in board gaming too. You know how many board games get funded on Kickstarter? Pretty much entirely because of their minis. It's a massive number. Minis in the board gaming space are alive and well, even if in the role-playing space, they've been somewhat deposed by virtual minis. But I think a lot of people, especially as people get back more and more to in-person gaming, minis will return. Before you guys leave, if you haven't given it a thumbs up, go ahead and give it a thumbs up if you feel it was thumb upable. If you find yourself in here and you're not subscribed to the channel, throw me a subscription. Doesn't hurt you. Helps me a little bit, just in terms of algorithms and YouTube surfacing stuff for me. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. I don't know. No one's come back to me and asked for their subscription back. It doesn't cost anything. And if you are listening to this in podcast form, I could use some reviews. So if you listen to the podcast, if you could review it on whatever service or app you're using, I'd appreciate that. Any last call? Last call for comments. Last call for alcohol. Besides Terrence and bumming people out with sad relics. Talking about sad relics of an ancient time. But yeah, it was a fun session, I guess, ultimately. And I am curious to see how Bogwig's going to respond, other than sending out his Bogwig's Bunch repackaged set of minor villains, seven strong though, so they could be a formidable challenge for the group. If especially if they do end up in a spot where they can ambush the party, that could be real trouble. C Simpson 14, thanks for streaming, dude. Hey, no problem. I'm glad everybody likes this stuff. All right, everybody, I will let you go then. Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Game on. Talk to you later.